The German Shepherd stepped into Ethan Mercer's headlights so suddenly that his right boot hit the brake before his mind caught up. The Ford F-250 slewed half a lane across the snow-packed pavement, tires hunting for grip while wind shoved loose powder sideways across US 191. Ethan corrected once, carefully, and the truck straightened. The dog never moved. She stood 30 feet ahead in the white glare, sable coat whipped by the blizzard, head low, ears forward, body angled as if she expected the truck to challenge her. Ethan killed the high beams. At 37, 6 years removed from the Navy SEAL teams, he trusted habits more than instincts. Slow the problem down. Keep an exit. Do not create a second emergency. None of those habits included arguing with a German Shepherd in the middle of a Wyoming snowstorm. He checked the mirrors, then the fuel gauge. A little over half a tank. Enough to reach Rock Springs if the highway stayed open. Maybe not enough to idle here all night if it did not. Visibility had dropped to a few hundred feet, sometimes less when gusts ripped across the sagebrush flats. The safest decision was obvious. Keep moving. Ethan eased the truck forward. The dog stepped aside. He exhaled, barely. Then, as the grill drew even with her, she moved directly back into the lane. Ethan stopped again. "You're making a strong case," he muttered. She did not bark, did not approach the door, did not wag, beg, or circle the truck. Instead, she stared at him for 2 seconds, turned her head toward a faint pullout disappearing under windblown snow, then looked back. Ethan opened his door. Cold hit the cab hard enough to tighten his jaw. He stepped down but stayed beside the truck, one gloved hand on the door frame. The Shepherd held her ground roughly 20 feet away. Snow clung heavily to the fur along her belly and rear legs. She looked tired, but not collapsed. Alert. Purposeful. Ethan crouched slightly, making himself smaller without moving closer. Easy. The dog shifted her weight backward. Boundary noted. He stayed where he was. Wind rattled ice against the truck's rocker panels. Somewhere beyond the headlights, the shoulder vanished into white. Ethan knew how quickly a person could lose orientation in conditions like this. He also knew the truck was his shelter, heat source, and best chance of getting off the road safely. He climbed back into the cab and tried one final time to continue. The Shepherd moved out of the lane before he reached her. Good. Ethan rolled forward 10 feet. 20. Then the dog ran toward the half-buried pullout, stopped at the edge of his headlights, and turned to face him. She waited, not blocking him now, asking something different. Ethan took his foot off the accelerator, and for the first time since she appeared, he realized she might not be trying to keep him from going forward at all. She might be trying to make him follow. Ethan let the F-250 idle in place while the German Shepherd waited at the edge of the headlights, half-turned toward the pullout. He reached behind the passenger seat for a plastic water bottle, a collapsible bowl, and the paper sack that held what was left of his lunch. The dog watched every movement, but stayed outside the cone of light nearest the cab. Ethan set the bowl on the packed snow, poured in a little water, then added a strip of roast beef from his sandwich and backed away to the truck. There. That's the deal. She approached slowly, nose working, but stopped short of the food. She sniffed once, lifted her head, and looked toward the pullout again. Ethan glanced at the dash clock. He had planned to be back in Rock Springs before dark, finish an invoice for a loader repair, then call a ranch foreman about a hydraulic job scheduled for morning. None of it was dramatic, which was exactly how he liked his life now. Tools and labeled drawers. Jobs with start times. Problems with parts numbers. Weather, unfortunately, did not care about schedules. He climbed into the cab, pulled his phone from the charger, and called county dispatch. The signal dropped once, returned, then carried just enough of his voice to be understood. He gave his location as precisely as he could and described the dog. The dispatcher told him there were no matching reports of a stranded driver or known crash near that mile marker. A deputy was farther south, but conditions were slowing everything down. Ethan looked through the windshield. The Shepherd was still there, staring into the blowing snow beyond the pullout. "Any report of someone missing a German Shepherd?" he asked. "Nothing current," the dispatcher said. Then came the part Ethan did not like. The highway behind him might be closed if visibility worsened. If he stayed, he needed to understand that help would not appear quickly. "Copy that," Ethan said, an old phrase slipping out before he could replace it with something civilian. He ended the call, zipped his coat higher, and stepped back into the wind. The shepherd moved toward the pullout. Ethan followed for about 50 yards, keeping the truck's taillights behind him as a reference. Then a gust erased them. White filled everything. No horizon. No road edge. Just wind and granular snow striking his hood. Ethan stopped immediately. He waited until the gust thinned, found the faint red glow again, and returned to the truck rather than pretend discipline made him immune to weather. The dog followed him partway, then stopped. He crouched beside the front tire. She came close enough to sniff his glove, but when he shifted his hand an inch, she stepped back. Ethan stayed still. Somewhere beyond her, the wind changed direction, and a dull metallic sound carried through the storm. The shepherd's ears snapped toward it. She touched her nose briefly against Ethan's knee, turned, and ran straight toward the sound. Ethan closed the truck door without getting inside. Ethan watched the shepherd disappear into the white and made the first bad decision of the evening. Instead of following on foot again, he opened the rear passenger door and set the roast beef deeper inside the warm cab. If she was scared, cold, and half-starved, he figured shelter might solve the problem faster than whatever lay beyond the pullout. He stepped away from the truck and angled his body aside, giving her a clear path. The dog reappeared through the blowing snow, moving fast at first, then slowing when she saw the open door. She approached within 10 feet. Her nose worked hard at the warm air spilling from the cab. Ethan stayed still. For 1 second, he thought she might climb in. Then he shifted one boot to the side, trying to widen the opening for her. The shepherd flinched, spun, and vanished back toward the pullout. Ethan's jaw tightened. Yeah, that was mine. He shut the door, pulled his hood close, and went after her. The wind had already softened the paw prints she left behind. 10 yards from the truck, the red taillights blurred. 20 yards farther, they disappeared completely. Ethan stopped, forcing himself not to keep moving just because he hated losing ground. Years ago, he had learned that discipline mattered most when every instinct wanted speed. Out here, though, that knowledge did not make him a weather expert. He turned until he found a faint reddish glow through the snow, fixed it in his peripheral vision, and moved only as far as he could without losing it. Then he saw the shepherd again. She stood near a low drift where the pullout widened, chest heaving, ears pinned briefly by the wind. She looked at him, then away. Ethan did not call. He did not reach. Instead, he moved parallel to her path, keeping 15 feet between them. When she walked, he walked. When she stopped, he stopped. The first time she looked back, he froze. The second time, he lowered his eyes. On the third, she kept going. It was not obedience. It was tolerance, and he had already learned what happened when he asked for more than she was ready to give. They advanced that way in short pieces, always within reach of the truck's dim glow behind them. Snow deepened around the edge of the pullout, dragging at Ethan's boots. Ahead, the wind shifted for 3 or 4 seconds, clearing a narrow slice of darkness. Something large sat crooked beyond the drift. The outline sharpened just long enough for Ethan to make out a rusted wheel. Then the white swallowed it again. The shepherd broke into a run. Ethan followed only far enough to keep her shape in sight. Another gust tore across the open ground, and when it cleared, he saw an old pickup half buried off the shoulder. The dog reached it, dropped low beside the frame, and disappeared under the truck. Ethan stopped several feet from the abandoned pickup and dropped to one knee, keeping his hands visible and his weight back. The German shepherd had wedged herself beneath the frame, body curved around something he still could not see. Wind pushed snow under the truck in thin, hissing sheets. Ethan shifted only enough to catch the angle beneath the chassis. 3 small shapes pressed together against the lee side of the vehicle. One puppy wriggled hard enough to bump another. A second lifted its head and made a thin sound. The third barely moved. Ethan's chest tightened, but he did not reach in. The mother dog turned toward him immediately, shoulders rigid, mouth closed, eyes fixed on his hands. Okay, he said quietly. Your line. He backed off 2 feet. The dog stayed between him and the puppies. The situation had changed completely. This was no longer about getting one stray off a highway. There were 4 animals exposed to cold, with no clear way to move them safely and no guarantee the mother would tolerate handling. Ethan pulled his phone from inside his coat and called dispatch again. The connection broke twice before holding. He gave the abandoned truck's location relative to the pullout and told them there were 3 puppies under it with an adult German Shepherd. He was careful with what he said next. One pup is less responsive than the others. I can't tell you why. The dispatcher transferred the information to County Animal Control and asked him to stay put if he could do so safely. Ethan glanced back toward the faint glow of his F-250. The distance looked longer now. He opened a storage bin in the bed and took out a drywall blanket he kept for roadside breakdowns. Returning to the pickup, he crouched outside the Shepherd's reach and slid one corner of the blanket across the snow, stopping well short of the puppies. The dog lowered her nose to it, then looked at him. Ethan waited. After several seconds, she stepped sideways, not away from the puppies, but enough to leave a narrow opening. He moved the blanket another foot. She allowed that much and no more. Ethan stopped immediately. A woman from Sweetwater County Animal Control called minutes later and introduced herself as Tessa Romero. Her questions were practical. Were the puppies wet? Were they vocal? Was the mother nursing? Was the space under the truck blocking wind or filling with snow? Ethan answered only what he could actually see. The mother's underside looked damp with packed snow. At least 2 puppies were moving. The truck's frame gave them some shelter from the direct gusts, but snow was building along the open edge. Tessa told him a veterinary emergency clinic in Rock Springs was being looped in and warned him not to assume the quiet puppy simply needed warmth. While Ethan listened, the Shepherd shifted closer to the smallest pup and blocked his view again. Tessa paused, then asked, "If we have to move one of those puppies before I get there, will she let you touch it?" Ethan looked at the dog's rigid stance and knew there was only one honest answer. "I have no idea." "Then don't test that unless you have to," Tessa said over the phone, and Ethan took the warning seriously. He backed another step from the abandoned pickup while the German Shepherd kept herself between him and the 3 puppies. The wind drove snow under the chassis in short bursts, and the loose edge of the blanket he had slid beneath the truck began to lift. Ethan watched the pattern instead of reaching for it. When the gust eased, he moved along the outside of the pickup and used another section of fabric from his roadside kit to block part of the crosswind without sealing the opening. The dog tracked him the entire time. She tolerated the work until his hand came too close to the quiet puppy. Her head snapped toward him and her body shifted instantly across the gap. Ethan stopped. No growl, no lunge, but the message was clear enough. He pulled his hand back. "Still your line." Tessa asked him to describe the puppies again. 2 were pressed together and moving intermittently. The third reacted more slowly when the mother nudged it. Ethan could not tell whether that meant cold, exhaustion, or something else, and Dr. Lena Park, now patched into the call from the emergency clinic in Rock Springs, told him not to guess. Keep them sheltered from wind. Keep them dry as much as you reasonably can. Don't try to fix what you can't assess from there. Ethan looked at the narrow space beneath the truck. "Copy." Lena paused. "You former military?" "Former Navy." "Good. Then you already know the difference between staying useful and improvising past your expertise." He almost smiled. Almost. A second call came through from Deputy Nolan Greer, forcing Ethan to switch lines. Nolan's concern was not the puppies. It was the highway. Visibility was dropping again, and a county response vehicle could not simply drive blind into a pullout because Ethan wanted help faster. A wide-out plow was working north, and Tessa would have to link up with law enforcement before making the final approach. "You may be there a while," Nolan said. Ethan glanced toward the faint lights of his F-250. "Understood. And if conditions turn, I may tell you to leave." That landed harder. Ethan had already decided staying was his responsibility. Nolan was reminding him that responsibility did not make the decision his alone. He ended the call and returned to the pickup with a transport crate from his truck, setting it well outside the mother's immediate space. She moved forward at once, blocking the opening beneath the chassis. Ethan stopped advancing, lowered the crate to the ground, and backed away. The dog approached only after he created distance. She sniffed the plastic door, circled once, then returned to the puppies. Not acceptance, just less alarm. Ethan left the crate where it was. Back at his truck, he checked the fuel gauge and kept the engine running for heat. When he returned to the pickup, the Shepherd was pawing repeatedly at the same strip of snow beside the rear axle. At first he thought she was agitated by the crate. Then a gust shoved fresh powder into the gap, and she dug harder. Ethan looked at the narrowing opening beneath the truck and realized waiting might be changing from the safest option into another kind of risk. Ethan crouched beside the abandoned pickup and watched the German Shepherd paw at the same narrowing strip beneath the rear axle. He did not assume she was telling him anything more complicated than what her body already showed. The space around her puppies was changing, and she did not like it. Wind shoved another sheet of loose snow beneath the chassis. Ethan moved to the opposite side, checked the drift, then backed away before his presence forced the mother deeper under the truck. Years of Navy discipline helped him resist the urge to solve everything at once. It did not make him a veterinarian, a highway officer, or an animal handler. He called Tessa again and described exactly what had changed. "The opening's getting smaller," he said. "She keeps clearing one side." Tessa told him to keep observing and not crowd the dog. Dr. Park came back on the line long enough to ask whether the puppies were still vocal and whether the quiet one reacted when the mother touched it. Ethan waited for another lull in the wind, lowered himself enough to see beneath the frame, and watched. Two puppies shifted against each other. The third moved, but only after the mother nudged it twice. "Still responding," Ethan said. "Slow." "That matters," Lena replied. "But don't turn that into a diagnosis. Your job right now is shelter, access, and updates." Ethan accepted that without argument. He walked back to his F-250, brought the portable work light closer, and angled it so the beam lit the ground around the pickup instead of shining directly into the dog's face. The better visibility changed what he could manage. He could see where snow was accumulating fastest, where the blanket edge was staying dry, and where not to step. He also saw the transport crate sitting exactly where he had left it. The mother noticed it too, circled once, then ignored it. Small progress, if progress was the word. A call from Nolan interrupted him. The deputy said a wide-out plow was making its way north, but Tessa could not simply drive into the pullout alone. They would meet first, then approach together if the road remained passable. "How long?" Ethan asked. "Longer than you want," Nolan said. Ethan looked at the truck's fuel gauge when he returned to the cab. The needle had dropped enough to matter. He could shut the engine off and conserve fuel, but then he would lose the warmest shelter available if one of the puppies had to be moved. He left it running. That choice fixed another limit in place. The storm was now spending 3 resources at once: the puppy's tolerance for cold, the road crew's access, and Ethan's fuel. When he returned to the pickup, the mother was no longer merely scraping at the drift. A gust collapsed several inches of loose snow into the opening, and she dug hard enough to throw powder behind her. Ethan stepped closer, stopped at the boundary she had enforced before, and saw the gap beneath the truck narrowing in real time. Waiting for help was no longer a neutral decision. Ethan watched the German Shepherd dig at the narrowing gap until the reason for her behavior changed in front of him. She was not pawing from agitation. Each time the wind shoved snow beneath the abandoned pickup, she cleared the same opening, then pressed her body back toward the puppies. The pattern was too consistent to ignore. He crouched just outside the boundary she had enforced and angled the work light lower. What had looked like a sheltered pocket under the truck was becoming a trap. Snow was banking along the frame, stealing space and blocking the little exchange of air and warmth the puppies still had. Ethan called Tessa and described the change. Dr. Park came onto the line again. "Check the quiet one from where you are," she said. "No guessing. Tell me what you actually see." Ethan waited until the mother shifted. The smallest puppy lay against the blanket, barely moving. He had told himself twice that the pup might simply be conserving energy. Now, when the mother nudged it, the response came late and weak. Ethan's hand tightened around the phone. "It moves, but not right away." There was a pause. "Then waiting for everyone to arrive may no longer be the safer option," Lena said. That erased Ethan's working assumption in a single sentence. Leaving the litter untouched had seemed like the least dangerous choice because the mother was protective and the road crew was coming. Now untouched meant continued exposure inside a space that was actively closing. The goal changed. They no longer needed only to hold position. They needed to move at least the weakest puppy before the shelter failed. Ethan looked at the shepherd. "That's going to be a problem." Tessa heard him. "Don't reach past her. Give her room to decide whether you're a threat." Ethan took the dry blanket from beside him and spread it flat on the snow, keeping his hands low and well outside the mother's reach. He did not call her. He did not point. He simply waited. The shepherd stood over the puppies, eyes fixed on him. Wind pushed another ribbon of snow beneath the frame. She glanced back, scraped twice at the drift, then faced Ethan again. He slid the blanket forward 6 inches and stopped. Her shoulders stiffened. He froze. Several seconds passed. Then she shifted one forepaw sideways. Not enough. Ethan waited longer. The quiet puppy gave a faint movement against her leg. The shepherd looked down, then stepped back exactly 1 pace. Ethan moved only then. He reached beneath the frame, slow and visible, and lifted the weakest puppy into the blanket. The mother followed halfway toward the F-250 before turning sharply back to the 2 still under the truck. Ethan carried the puppy toward the warmer shelter he had prepared, feeling the weight of what had just changed. The litter was now separated. The mother was split between 2 locations, and there was no simple way to undo it. His phone crackled as Nolan's voice came through. The wide-out plow had stopped short of the pullout. The wind had shifted, and the approach they had counted on was no longer safe. Ethan reached the F-250 with the weakest puppy wrapped against his chest just as Nolan's message ended in static. The wide-out plow had stopped short. The route they had expected to use was no longer considered safe. Ethan opened the rear door and placed the puppy inside the warmest protected space he had prepared, keeping the blanket around it and following Dr. Park's earlier instructions instead of improvising. The German shepherd had followed halfway from the abandoned pickup, then turned back toward the other 2 puppies. That split became the problem. Ethan could not be in both places, and the mother would not stay with the puppy he had moved. He left the truck door cracked only long enough to check the pup's response, then closed it and hurried back through the blowing snow. The shepherd was already under the pickup again, pressed close to the remaining 2. Ethan brought another blanket and stopped outside her reach. She watched him, breathing hard now, snow packed along her legs and underside. When he lowered the blanket and waited, she allowed him closer than before. That was cooperation, but it was conditional. He reached toward the nearer puppy, moving slowly. The mother stayed still. Ethan thought he had enough permission. He was wrong. The moment he shifted the puppy's weight, the shepherd blocked him with her shoulder and forced him to stop. No attack. No dramatic warning. Just a firm refusal. Ethan backed out immediately, but the consequence was real. The puppy remained under the truck, and several more minutes were gone. He had misread tolerance as consent. Wind pushed another shallow collapse of powder into the gap. Ethan cleared only what he could reach safely from outside, then checked his truck through the storm. Its lights were dim shapes now. He called Tessa. She and Nolan were still working toward him from the south, but their approach had become slower and more controlled. I moved one, Ethan said. Mother won't let me take the next. Then don't force it, Tessa replied. If she panics, you could lose her in that visibility. Ethan looked at the shepherd. She was not calm. She was exhausted, divided between the puppy in his truck and the 2 still beneath the pickup, repeatedly turning her head toward both locations. He had created a separation he could not quickly resolve. The failure was not that the first puppy had been moved. The failure was that Ethan had assumed the next step would become easier once the mother allowed the first. Instead, the rescue had become more fragile. He returned to the F-250 and checked the fuel gauge. Lower again. The weak puppy still needed warmth. 2 others still needed shelter. The mother would not leave them, and help could no longer reach the pullout on the original plan. Ethan picked up the phone and told Tessa, I'm done trying to move another one alone. Tell me where you need me when you get here. Stay where I need you. Turned out to mean something more precise than Ethan expected. 40 minutes later, amber light finally pulsed through the storm south of the pullout, followed by the slow shape of a county vehicle tucked behind a wide-out plow. Deputy Nolan Greer reached Ethan first, moving carefully across the packed snow and checking the road before he checked the dogs. Tessa Romero came behind him carrying 2 transport crates and a thermal bag. Ethan started explaining what he had done. Tessa held up one gloved hand. Show me first. Talk second. He did. The weak puppy was still in the heated cab. The mother and 2 others remained under the abandoned pickup. Snow had banked higher along the frame. Tessa crouched outside the shepherd's boundary and watched without reaching in. Her goal was obvious. Read the dog before asking the dog to accept anything else. Nolan's goal was different. He looked at the road, the wind, Ethan's fuel gauge, then the plow idling beyond the pullout. We don't have unlimited time here, he said. Ethan nodded, then stepped toward the pickup when Tessa opened a crate. The shepherd stiffened immediately. Ethan stopped. Tessa looked at him. Back up 5 feet. His first reaction showed in his shoulders before his face. He had spent hours getting this close. Tessa had been here 3 minutes. Still, he stepped back. The dog's posture changed, but not enough. When Tessa advanced alone, the shepherd retreated farther beneath the truck, putting herself between the crate and the puppies. Tessa stopped too. "She knows you," she said. "She doesn't know me." Ethan almost answered that this was what he had been trying to say, but the words died before they reached his mouth. Tessa's expertise had not failed. His familiarity had not made him an expert. Both facts had to fit in the same rescue. She repositioned the crate and asked Ethan to stand off to one side where the mother could see him without feeling boxed in. He did not call her or touch her. He simply stayed still. Tessa then slid a folded blanket toward the opening. The shepherd watched Tessa, glanced at Ethan, and after several tense seconds shifted enough to let the blanket pass. It was a new kind of cooperation, not permission for Ethan to take over, and not acceptance of Tessa alone, but a choice the dog made because both humans respected the same boundary. That choice mattered immediately. Tessa could now work closer without driving the mother deeper into the shrinking shelter. Nolan stepped over from the road, expression tight. "We've got another problem. The plow could keep one lane usable only for a limited window, and Ethan's truck might not get another escorted chance out if he stayed through the full transfer." Ethan looked at his F-250, then at the shepherd under the pickup. For the first time, helping the dogs could cost him the one thing still giving him heat, transportation, and a clean exit. The cost became clear when Tessa tried to move the second puppy without Ethan beside her. He had assumed that once animal control arrived, his part was finished, that professionals would take over and he could follow the plow south before the highway closed behind them. Instead, the German shepherd flattened herself across the opening beneath the abandoned pickup the moment Ethan stepped toward his F-250. Tessa stopped immediately. "Come back to where you were." Ethan returned to the side of the truck, several feet from the dog. He did nothing else. No command. No reaching. Within half a minute, the shepherd's shoulders loosened enough for Tessa to reposition the blanket near the 2 remaining puppies. The meaning landed harder than Ethan expected. The mother had not accepted human help in general. She had accepted a very specific arrangement. Tessa could work if Ethan stayed inside the dog's established field of safety. That made him useful, but it also exposed the assumption he had been carrying since the amber lights appeared. Help arriving had not freed him. It had made his decision more consequential. Nolan stepped close enough to be heard over the wind. "The plow is making one escorted run south now. Your truck can go with it." Ethan looked toward the F-250, engine still idling, tools and invoices inside. "Tomorrow morning's job waiting on the other end of the road. And if I stay, we may have to leave it here until the highway reopens. You ride out with County." Ethan's eyes went to the fuel gauge through the windshield. Then to Tessa, who was watching the shepherd rather than him. "Can you finish without me?" he asked. Tessa answered carefully. "Maybe, but every time you leave her sight, she closes the space. I'm not going to promise I can move 2 puppies and then load her before that access disappears." It was not flattery. It was not dependence. It was a limitation imposed by the dog's behavior. Ethan nodded once and walked to his truck. For a moment, Nolan probably expected him to climb in. Instead, Ethan shut off the engine, took his phone charger, coat liner, and work bag from the cab, then handed Nolan the spare key. "If it has to stay, it stays." Nolan took the key. "You sure?" Ethan looked back at the shepherd. She had shifted enough for Tessa to work near the opening again, but her eyes were fixed on him. "No," he said. "I'm decided." The plow pulled away with the first escort, leaving Ethan's F-250 dark beside the highway. The choice could no longer be undone by changing his mind 5 minutes later. Tessa moved closer to the pickup and said, "Good. Because when the last puppy comes out, the hard part starts. She may follow them, or she may bolt into that wideout if we get this wrong." Nolan checked his watch. "Then we have 1 window left, and it's closing." Ethan's decision became expensive before the next puppy ever left the snow. Nolan came back from the road with his phone raised against the wind. "Highway's closing behind the plow. Your truck stays here until they reopen this stretch." Ethan looked once at the dark F-250, then pulled out his own phone. 1 bar. Barely enough. He called the ranch foreman who expected him at 7 the next morning to repair a hydraulic system. I'm not making it, Ethan said when the man answered. He did not explain the Navy, the storm, or the dog. He gave the facts: road closure, county rescue, stranded vehicle. The foreman needed the machine working before noon and could not wait. He would call another mechanic. Ethan accepted it. That job was gone. So was the clean schedule he had built around it. He slipped the phone back into his coat and walked to the position Tessa had chosen beside the abandoned pickup. The loss changed nothing about what needed doing. Tessa had already moved the second puppy onto the blanket, but the mother German Shepherd remained tense, tracking every shift between Ethan and the crate. Ethan crouched sideways several feet away, leaving the dog a clear path back to the truck. He did not touch her. He did not urge her forward. Tessa moved the puppy toward the county vehicle in slow stages, and the shepherd followed 3 steps before stopping. Her head swung back toward the last puppy beneath the chassis. She returned immediately. Ethan felt his old impulse rise, the urge to make the sequence cleaner, faster, more efficient. Instead, he stayed where Tessa had put him. The last puppy was the hardest. Snow had narrowed the opening, and the mother kept repositioning herself between Tessa's hands and the pup. Tessa waited. Nolan checked the road again, visibly fighting the clock, but refusing to turn urgency into recklessness. "We need to move soon," he said. "I know," Tessa answered. Ethan shifted only when she asked. The shepherd watched him, then stepped aside enough for Tessa to reach the puppy with the blanket. When the third puppy came free, the mother followed it out from under the pickup. For several seconds, she stood in the open, wind flattening the fur along her sides. Then she did something she had never done before. Instead of circling back beneath the truck, she walked directly to Ethan and stopped close enough that her shoulder brushed his knee. No command had brought her there. No food waited in his hand. She remained beside him while Tessa carried the final puppy toward the transport vehicle. Ethan did not touch her. He simply turned when Tessa moved, and the shepherd turned with him. Behind them, the abandoned pickup was empty now. Ahead, all 3 puppies were inside the county vehicle, but the mother still had to choose whether to enter. Nolan opened the protected loading area and called, "This is the last window." Ethan stepped away from the ramp instead of toward it, giving the shepherd the open path to her puppies. Ethan stepped away from the ramp, and that decision finally gave the German shepherd a clear choice. She stood in the blowing snow with her ears pinned against the wind, looking first at Ethan, then at the open transport compartment where all 3 puppies were already secured. Tessa stayed beside the vehicle without reaching for her. Nolan watched the road and the plow beyond it, because his responsibility was getting everyone out before the last usable lane disappeared. The mother dog hesitated, backed 1 step, then heard one of the puppies shift inside the crate. Her head turned immediately. She moved forward. 1 paw touched the ramp, then another. Ethan remained where he was. No command, no leash tug, no attempt to make the moment about him. The shepherd climbed into the vehicle on her own and pushed her nose toward the crates. Tessa closed the transport door only after the dog settled beside them. That answered the question the whole night had been building toward. The dog had blocked Ethan's truck because her 3 puppies were trapped beneath the abandoned pickup, and she had kept returning to him because she needed help she could not provide alone. The storm, the drifting snow, and the shrinking shelter had been the direct threat, not a hidden attacker, not a crime, not a mystery under the truck. The sequence made sense now because every earlier detail fit. She had refused food, repeatedly looked toward the pullout, dug at the same opening as snow narrowed it, and would not stay away from the puppies even after the weakest one was moved. Nolan signaled the plow. Tessa rode with the animals. Ethan climbed into the county vehicle, leaving his F-250 behind exactly as planned. The convoy moved south at a controlled pace behind Wydot, and nobody pretended the drive was safe just because the hardest part seemed over. At the emergency clinic in Rock Springs, Dr. Lena Park and her team took over immediately. Ethan stayed back while they examined the puppies and the mother. The official result came in stages. All 3 puppies were alive. The weakest needed active warming, fluids, and close monitoring. The other 2 were cold but more responsive. The mother was exhausted, mildly dehydrated, and still protective, but stable enough to remain near her litter under supervision. Lena could not say exactly how long they had been under the pickup, and she did not invent a number. What she could confirm was that the chassis had given them partial protection from direct wind. The mother had been nursing, and the drifting snow had been closing that shelter off. Another delay could have changed the outcome. Ethan had not saved them by knowing more than everyone else. He had stopped, observed, made mistakes, corrected them, and eventually accepted the help of people whose jobs covered what his did not. Tessa handled the animals. Nolan and Wydot handled the road. Lena handled the medical decisions. By the time the clinic doors closed behind the dogs, the external crisis was over. One mother and exactly 3 puppies had been removed from the blizzard alive and placed into professional care. Ethan turned to leave without calling the shepherd over, and she stayed where she belonged, pressed close to her puppies. 3 days later, after US 191 reopened and county crews cleared his truck for pickup, Ethan drove back toward Rock Springs with one stop left to make. 3 days later, Ethan parked the recovered F-250 outside the small rescue facility near Rock Springs and sat for a moment with both hands resting on the steering wheel. The truck smelled faintly of cold vinyl, road salt, and the coffee he had forgotten in the cup holder before the highway closed. His missed ranch job had already gone to another mechanic, and the foreman had filled the next 2 days with someone else. Ethan had lost the work. He had not lost his business, but the empty space on his schedule was real, and he did not pretend otherwise. He shut off the engine and went inside. Tessa met him near the kennel area, carrying a clipboard instead of a transport crate this time. The mother German shepherd and all 3 puppies had been transferred from emergency veterinary care into supervised foster recovery. The weakest puppy was improving, eating with assistance, and staying warm without intensive support. The other 2 were active enough to annoy their mother, which Tessa considered good news. No one had rushed a placement decision. The rescue would keep the family together while the puppies still needed her, complete the normal medical work, and sort out long-term homes later. Ethan signed a brief statement confirming where and how he had found them, then handed the clipboard back. "You want an adoption application?" Tessa asked. There was no pressure in her voice. Ethan looked through the kennel window. The shepherd was lying on clean bedding while one puppy climbed halfway across her foreleg. "No," Tessa nodded. "Didn't think so. That obvious? You're here to see how they are. That's different." Ethan entered only when Tessa opened the inner gate and told him where to stand. He stopped several feet away. The shepherd lifted her head. In the blizzard, she had measured every inch between them. Now there was no wind driving snow under a rusted chassis, no highway closing, no reason to keep him close for help. Ethan did not crouch, call her name, or offer food. She made the decision herself. The dog rose, crossed the concrete floor, and stopped beside him. Her shoulder pressed lightly against his leg for 2 quiet seconds. Then she turned and went back to the puppies. Ethan let out a breath through his nose and rubbed one gloved thumb across the seam of his jacket pocket. That was enough. Outside, the storm had passed. Late winter light lay clean across the sagebrush country, bright without warmth, and thin ribbons of old snow clung only where the wind had piled them deep. At the stop sign before US 191, Ethan checked both directions, then glanced once in the mirror. 3 days earlier, a German shepherd had stood in his headlights and refused to move. Now the road behind him was empty. He eased onto the highway, and miles away behind him, the mother dog settled beside her 3 puppies in a warm room, while the Wyoming high desert opened clear and silver beneath the afternoon sky.